The dim glow of the plasma heater cast flickering shadows across the metal walls of Outpost Theta 7. The remote station sat on the edge of known space, where 3 different star systems met in an uneasy alliance. Tonight, the usual sounds of humming machinery and distant communications chatter had died down to a whisper. Vextal, a seasoned Krillian warrior with battle scars etched deep into his katana's armor, sat hunched forward on a makeshift stool. His forearms moved in slow, deliberate gestures as he spoke. The scars told stories of their own: plasma burns from the siege of Altair, claw marks from the beast wars of Proxima, and newer wounds that still ached when the artificial gravity shifted around him. A circle of younger soldiers had gathered during their rest period. There was Crix, a green-skinned Zilonian, whose large eyes reflected the firelight like mirrors. Beside him sat Thorn, a massive Gorvakian, whose rocky exterior made him look like a living mountain. The newest addition was Zara, a floating ethereal whose translucent form shimmered with curiosity. "You want to know about the humans?" Vextal's voice carried a weight that made the others lean in closer. The veteran's mandibles clicked as he searched for the right words. 3 rotations ago, I fought alongside them during the integration wars. What I witnessed... ... He paused, his compound eyes reflecting memories that still haunted his dreams. It will change how you see these fragile-looking bipeds forever. The young Zilonian recruit, Crix, shifted uncomfortably on his perch. His webbed fingers drummed against his knee as he spoke. "But, Commander, they're so small, so weak-looking. I've seen the footage from their home world. They don't have natural armor like us Krillians. No energy manipulation like the ethereals. No rock-hard skin like the Gorvakians. How dangerous could they really be?" Vextal's compound eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Crix's skin change from green to a nervous pale yellow. "That's exactly what we all thought, young one. That's what made it so terrifying when we learned the truth." Thorn's deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I heard they got accepted into the Coalition pretty quickly. It's faster than any species in recorded history. There must be something special about them." Special. Vextal let out a sound that might have been laughter if it weren't so hollow. One way to put it, stood up slowly, his joints creaking from old injuries. "When the first met humans, I thought the Council had made a mistake. These creatures looked like they'd break if you breathed on them too hard." Zara's ethereal form pulsed with curiosity. "What changed your mind?" "The war changed everything," Vextal replied, beginning to pace around the small circle. "You see, when the integration wars started, every species was tested. The Andromedans with their energy shields, the Cephians with their hive mind tactics, the Titanians with their massive war machines. Each species had their moment to prove they belonged in the Coalition." He stopped walking and looked directly at each of them. But humans... humans were different. They didn't just want to prove they belonged. They wanted to prove they could survive anything the universe threw at them. Crix's curiosity overcame his nervousness. "What do you mean, Commander?" "I mean," Vextal said, settling back down, "that humans don't fight like the rest of us. We fight with honor, with tactics, with overwhelming force. Humans fight with something else entirely, something that goes beyond logic or reason. The plasma." Heater flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the distance, they could hear the night shift changing, boots echoing in the corridors. "I remember my first briefing about Earth," Vextal continued. "The intelligence report said they were a young species, barely out of their home system. No energy weapons, no force fields, no faster-than-light travel. Their biggest ships were tiny compared to our battle cruisers." Thorn shifted his massive frame. "Sounds like they were completely outmatched." "That's what I thought too," Vextal admitted. "But then I read deeper into the reports. Species had spent their entire history fighting. It's not just against other species, but against their own planet. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, diseases that should have wiped them out completely." Zara's form brightened with interest. "They survived all that?" "Survived?" Vextal's mandibles clicked rapidly. "They thrived. Every disaster made them stronger, more adaptable. By the time they reached space, they weren't just explorers. They were the ultimate survivors. The veteran warrior looked around at his young audience, noting how they hung on every word. When I first saw a human up close, I thought he looked fragile. His name was Heian, and he was assigned to my unit as a liaison, short, thin, with soft skin and no visible weapons. I wondered if he'd last 5 minutes in real combat. Crix leaned forward, eagerly. What happened to him? Extel's expression grew distant. That's a story for another time, young one. But I'll tell you this much. By the end of our first mission together, I wasn't worried about Heian surviving. I was worried about what would happen to anyone who got in his way. The implications of those words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. In the flickering light of the plasma heater, even the bravest among them felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The plasma heater's glow seemed to dim as Vextel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The other soldiers instinctively moved closer, sensing that what came next would be something they'd never forget. It was during the Void Reaper attacks Vextel began, his forearms trembling slightly at the memory. You younger ones probably don't remember the Void Reapers. They were pirates, but not ordinary ones. These creatures fed on fear itself. Their ships were massive, black as the empty space between stars, and they moved like hungry predators through the galaxy. Crix's skin had turned a pale blue with anxiety. I've heard stories about them. They say the Reapers could drain the life force from entire planets. The stories don't do them justice, Vextel replied grimly. When they attacked Kepler Station, we had a full coalition fleet defending it. Krillian battlecruisers, ethereal lightships, Gorvakian heavy destroyers. The station itself was a fortress, built into an asteroid the size of a small moon. Thorn's rocky features shifted into what might have been concern. That sounds like enough firepower to stop anything. You'd think so, Vextel said, standing up and beginning to pace again. But the Void Reapers brought something we'd never seen before. Their flagship was the size of a city, covered in dark metal that seemed to absorb light itself. They called it the Soul Eater, and it lived up to its name. The veteran warrior stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. Standard protocol when facing superior forces is simple. Form defensive positions, protect civilian evacuation routes, and retreat if necessary. Every species in the coalition follows these rules. They're written in our military codes, taught in our academies. Zara's ethereal form pulsed with curiosity. But the humans didn't follow protocol. The humans threw the rulebook out the airlock, Vextel said with something that might have been admiration. Their commander was a female called Hannah. I'll never forget the first time I saw her. She was small, even by human standards, probably no taller than my waist. Her hair was tied back in a simple knot, and she wore the same basic uniform as her. Soldiers, he gestured with his upper arms, recreating the scene. When the Soul Eater broke through our outer defenses, I expected her to order an immediate retreat. Instead, she stood on the bridge of her command ship, staring at the approaching enemy through the viewport. Her face was completely calm, like she was working out a math problem. What did she do? Crix asked, his voice barely audible. She turned to her communications officer and said 5 words that still give me nightmares, Vextel replied. Turn the soul into a kinetic weapon. The alien soldiers exchanged confused glances. Thorn spoke first. A kinetic weapon? What does that mean? It means, Vextel said slowly, that she ordered her own supply ship to ram the enemy flagship. At full speed, the soul was massive, carrying enough supplies to feed the entire station for months. But that wasn't the worst part. His voice grew haunted as he continued. The soul still had crew aboard. Engineers, medical staff, supply officers. Over 300 humans who had signed up to support the war effort, not to die in a suicide attack. Zara's form flickered with shock. Surely they evacuated first. That's what I thought too, Vextel admitted. I opened a communication channel to the soul, expecting to coordinate the evacuation. Instead, I heard something that chilled me to my core. Human voices, calm and determined, preparing for battle. He closed his compound eyes for a moment, reliving the memory. A male named Day was leading a squad of soldiers through the Soul's corridors. His voice came through the CUM system, clear as starlight. All stations, this is Day. We're going to ram that ugly ship. We're going to make sure it hurts. But why didn't they evacuate? Crix asked, his skin now a deep purple. With confusion. Because Vexdal said, humans have this strange idea that running away from a fight is worse than dying in one. Day and his soldiers stayed behind to manually control the ship's systems, to make sure the ram attack hit exactly where it would, do the most damage. The veteran warrior began pacing again, his movements agitated. I watched through the tactical display as the Soul changed course. The Void Reapers saw it coming, of course. They launched everything they had at that supply. Ship, energy beams, plasma cannons, missile swarms. The Soul's hull was burning, atmosphere leaking out in frozen clouds. And the humans just kept going? Thorn asked. They kept going, Vexdal confirmed. I could hear them over the comm system, fighting hand-to-hand with Reaper boarding parties in the corridors. The ship was falling apart around them, but they kept the engines running, kept the navigation systems online. His voice dropped to a whisper. The last transmission from Commander Hannah, before impact, came through crystal clear. No static, no fear, just cold determination. If we're going down, we're taking you with us. The plasma heater flickered, casting wild shadows on the walls. In the silence that followed, they could hear the distant hum of the station's life support systems. The explosion, Vexdal continued, was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The Soul hit the Soul Leader at almost light speed. Amen. The impact created a flash of light so bright it overloaded our sensors. When the glare faded, both ships were gone. Not damaged, not disabled, gone. Payson had looked at each of them in turn. But that wasn't the end of it. The explosion created a chain reaction that took out 3 more Reaper vessels. The shockwave disabled 2 others. In one suicidal attack, the humans had destroyed almost half the enemy fleet. And the humans? Zara asked quietly. 312 humans died in that attack? Vexdal said solemnly. Commander Hannah read their names aloud over the comm system after the battle. Every single one. When she finished, she looked at her remaining officers and said, "Acceptable losses. Now, let's finish this fight." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Crix spoke up, his voice shaking. "How can they call that acceptable?" Vexdal's mandibles clicked slowly. "Because, young one, humans don't measure victory by how many of them survive. They measure it by how many of their enemies don't." Vexdal's voice grew distant as he continued, his compound eyes reflecting memories that seemed to play out before him like holograms. The plasma heater's warmth couldn't chase away the chill that had settled over the group. 2 cycles later, "We thought we understood humans a little better," he began, his forearms gesturing slowly. "We were wrong. Dead wrong." It was during a routine patrol mission in the Zarian Belt where asteroid mining operations stretched across 3 star systems. Crix shifted nervously. "I've heard about the belt. Dangerous place, even for experienced miners." "Dangerous doesn't begin to cover it," Vexdal replied. "The asteroids there are rich in trilithium, but they're also incredibly unstable. One wrong move, and an entire mining station can collapse into space dust. That's exactly what happened to Mining Station Alpha 12. Stood up and walked to the small viewport, staring out at the stars. The distress signal came through during the night shift. A massive asteroid had shifted in its orbit, crushing 3 levels of the mining complex. Over 200 human miners were trapped in the lower sections, with toxic gases building up and the structural supports failing one by one. Thorn's rocky features creased with concern. "How long did they have?" 6 hours, Vexdal said grimly. "Maybe less." The rescue coordinator, a Krillian like myself, immediately called for heavy excavation equipment from the nearest coalition base. The closest rescue ships were 18 hours away. Zar's ethereal form pulsed with understanding. It wouldn't make it in time. "Exactly," Vexdal confirmed, turning back to face them. "Protocol demanded we wait for proper excavation. Equipment. We had standard emergency tools, but nothing designed for this kind of disaster. The smart thing to do was establish a perimeter, monitor the situation, and wait for the professionals." He flexed his claws unconsciously, a nervous habit he'd developed. After years of combat, but the humans, they had other ideas. A rescue team arrived within an hour, led by a male named Wu and a female named Sol. I'll never forget seeing them for the first time. What did they look like? Crix asked, his skin slowly shifting from nervous purple back to its natural green. Wu was tall for a human, with calloused hands and burned scars from years of working with mining equipment. Sol was shorter, but her eyes had this intensity that made you step back without realizing it. Both of them looked at the collapsed mining station like it was a puzzle they were going to solve, no matter what it cost. Vextel began pacing again, his movements more agitated than before. The first thing they did was completely ignore the rescue coordinator's orders. While we were setting up command posts and running structural analysis, they grabbed mining explosives from their ship and started walking toward the collapse site. Mining explosives? Thorn rumbled in disbelief. Around an unstable structure? Exactly what I said, Vextel replied. I caught up with them at the entrance to the damaged section. Sol was already placing charges while Wu was calculating blast patterns on a handheld device. I told them to stop, that they were going to bring the whole place down. He stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. Sol looked at me with those intense eyes and said, "Maybe. But if we don't try, 200 people die for sure. If we do try, maybe some of them live." Then she went back to placing explosives like I wasn't even there. The plasma heater crackled, sending sparks up toward the ceiling. In the flickering light, Vextal's expression looked haunted. The first explosion shook the entire asteroid, he continued. Debris fell like rain, and warning alarms screamed. Through the complex, the rescue coordinator ordered them to stop immediately. Sol's response was to light the second charge. How did they know where to blast? Zara asked, her form shimmering with curiosity.
Oh.
They didn't, Vextel admitted. Each detonation was a guess. Based on Wu's understanding of asteroid geology and Sol's experience with controlled demolitions, they were literally blasting their way through solid rock, hoping to find pockets where the miners might still be alive. His voice grew softer. I followed them deeper into the complex, along with a few other coalition soldiers. The air was thick with dust and toxic gases. Our environmental suits were beeping warnings constantly. But the humans just kept going, setting charges, clearing debris, crawling through spaces barely wide enough for their bodies. Did they find anyone? Crix asked breathlessly. After the fifth explosion, we heard something that made us all freeze, Vextel said. Voices. Human voices, calling out from somewhere deep in the rubble. Sol immediately started calculating where the next charge should go, but Wu grabbed her arm. He closed his compound eyes, reliving the moment. Wu said, "If we're wrong about this one, we'll kill them all." Sol looked at him, covered in dust and blood from crawling through the debris, and said, "Then we better not be wrong." She lit the charge. The silence stretched until Thorn finally spoke. What happened? The explosion opened up a cavity the size of a small room, Vextal replied. 43 miners were huddled inside, injured but alive. But that was just the beginning. Sol and Wu kept blasting, kept crawling, kept risking everything to reach the next group of survivors. His voice cracked slightly. By the time they were done, they'd rescued 200 miners. Every single person who was still alive in that collapse. Look at the cost. He shook his head. Half of the human rescue team didn't make it out. They were buried in cave-ins, crushed by falling debris, or overcome by toxic gases. And Sol? Zara asked quietly. Sol survived, Vextel said. She was in the medical bay for weeks, recovering from gas poisoning and multiple broken bones. When she was finally well enough to talk, I went to see her. I had to ask her why she'd taken such an incredible risk. He looked around at his stunned audience, I said. Commander Sol, you and your team risked everything to save those miners. Many of your people died. Was it worth it? She looked at me from her hospital bed, still hooked up to breathing machines, and just shrugged. What did she say? Crix whispered. She said, "It's Tuesday," Vextel replied, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Just like that. It's Tuesday. as if risking her life and the lives of her team to save strangers was just another day of the week. The implications of those words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. In the flickering light of the plasma heater, they began to understand that humans didn't just fight differently. They thought differently about what was worth dying for. Tuesday, Vextel repeated, looking around at his stunned audience.
Yes.
As if dying for strangers was just another day of the week. The temperature seemed to drop as Vextel's story took a darker turn. The plasma heater's glow flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the metal walls like ghosts from the past. The veteran warrior's forearms trembled slightly as he prepared to share the most disturbing memory of all. But the mining incident wasn't the worst of it, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. What I'm about to tell you happened during the Plague Wars. When the hegemony decided that conventional weapons weren't enough, they wanted to wipe out entire species without firing a single shot. Crix's skin had turned a sickly pale green. The Plague Wars. Thought those were just stories, legends to scare young recruits. I wish they were just stories, Vextel replied grimly. The hegemony had developed something called the Death Bloom, weaponized pathogens designed to kill any carbon-based life form. These weren't ordinary diseases. They were engineered to target cellular structures, breaking down DNA chains and destroying immune systems within minutes. Thorne's rocky exterior seemed to dim with worry. How did they deploy these weapons? Atmospheric bombs, Vextel said, his mandibles clicking rapidly. They would drop these devices over populated areas, and the pathogens would spread through the air like invisible death. We'd seen entire Krillian colonies wiped out in hours. Lost 3 homeworlds before we even understood what was happening. He stood up and walked to the viewport again, staring out at the stars, as if looking for answers in the darkness. When the hegemony targeted the human colony of New Sol, we expected it to be another massacre. The humans had no special immunity, no advanced medical technology. They seemed so fragile compared to the rest of us. What happened? Zara asked, her ethereal form pulsing with nervous energy. The attack came without warning, Vextel continued. I was part of a coalition relief force, but we were too far away to help. All we could do was monitor the situation and prepare for another burial detail. The Death Bloom bombs fell like rain across the colony's main city. His voice grew haunted. The initial reports were exactly what we expected. Humans collapsing in the streets, emergency services overwhelmed, medical facilities unable to cope. But then something impossible happened. He turned back to face his audience, his compound eyes reflecting the firelight. A human male named June was part of a military unit stationed at the colony. He was hit with a direct bioweapon blast while trying to evacuate civilians. According to every medical scan we had, he should have died instantly. But he didn't, Crix asked, his voice trembling. Not only did he not die, Vextel said slowly, he kept fighting. I watched the battlefield recordings later. As human, with pathogens literally eating away at his cellular structure, continued to carry wounded civilians to safety. His body was changing, adapting, fighting back against the bioweapon in real time. The plasma heater crackled, sending sparks into the air. In the flickering light, Vextel's expression looked almost fearful. Within hours, Jun had developed immunity, he continued. Not just resistance, complete immunity. His body had somehow figured out how to neutralize the most advanced biological weapon ever created. But that was just the beginning. What do you mean? Thorne rumbled. Other humans started showing the same adaptation, Vextel explained. A female named Yuna was leading another military unit. When the bioweapons hit her position, she ordered something that still gives me nightmares, she told her infected soldiers. To keep advancing. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I was monitoring their communications frequency. I heard Yuna's voice, calm and determined, giving orders to soldiers who were literally dying from biological weapons. If you're still breathing, you're still fighting, she said. If you can walk, you can advance. If you can't walk, you can still shoot. Zara's form flickered with shock. She sent dying soldiers into battle. She sent evolving soldiers into battle, Vextel corrected, because that's what they were doing, evolving. Right there on the battlefield, Human bodies were adapting to survive the impossible. Within 6 hours, an entire human battalion had developed immunity to weapons that had wiped out civilizations. He began pacing again, his movements agitated. The hegemony forces couldn't believe what they were seeing. They launched more bioweapons, different strains, stronger concentrations. The humans just kept adapting, kept advancing, kept fighting. How is that even possible? Crix asked, his skin now a deep blue with confusion and fear. That's what terrified the hegemony, Vextel replied. They realized they weren't fighting an ordinary species. They were fighting something that could adapt to any threat, no matter how deadly. The humans weren't just surviving their biological weapons, they were becoming immune to them. His voice grew distant. The final battle recordings are classified at the highest levels, but I've seen them. Commander Yuna, leading her troops through clouds of bioweapons that should have killed them instantly. Human soldiers, their bodies, still showing signs of the adaptation process, fighting with a ferocity that made the hegemony's finest warriors retreat in terror. The enemy retreated, Thorn asked in disbelief. The enemy retreated, Vextel confirmed, his voice filled with, not because they were defeated in conventional terms, but because they were terrified of what the humans were becoming. Evolution in action, driven by pure will to survive. He stopped pacing and looked directly at each of them. The hegemony's final transmission before they abandoned the sector was intercepted by Coalition intelligence. As their commander said, "These aren't soldiers. They're something else. Something that adapts to anything we throw at them. We can't fight evolution itself." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Zara spoke up, her voice barely audible. "What happened to Jen and Yuna?" "They survived," Vextel said simply, along with most of their troops. The human colony not only survived the bioweapon attack, but developed permanent immunity to an entire class of biological weapons. They turned the hegemony's greatest strength into their own advantage. He sat back down, his forearms folding across his chest. That's when I realized the truth about humans. They're not just another species joining the Coalition. They're evolutions. Answer to extinction itself. Every threat they face, every impossible challenge, just makes them stronger. The plasma heater flickered one more time, casting long shadows across the room. In the dim light, the alien soldiers looked at each other with new understanding and perhaps a healthy dose of fear. Silence stretched across the outpost like a heavy blanket, broken only by the distant hum of life support systems and the occasional creak of metals settling in the artificial gravity. The alien soldiers sat frozen around the plasma heater, their minds struggling to process what they'd just heard. Each species dealt with shock differently. Crix's skin had turned a pale white. Thorn's rocky exterior had dimmed to almost black, and Zara's ethereal form flickered like a dying star. The Krillian warrior's voice carried a mixture of respect and fear as he looked at each of them in turn. "You see, we all thought humans were just another species joining the Coalition. Another set of recruits to train, another culture to understand, another ally to fight alongside." Vextel's compound eyes reflected the firelight as he continued. "But they're not just another species. They're something else entirely. They're evolution's answer to extinction itself. Every other species in the galaxy fights to win battles, to claim territory, to prove their strength. Humans fight for something much more fundamental." "What do you mean?" Crix whispered, his voice barely audible. "They don't just fight to win battles," Vextel explained, his forearms gesturing slowly. "They fight to ensure their species survives whatever the universe throws at them. Every challenge, every threat, every impossible situation just makes them more determined to keep going." Thorn's deep voice rumbled with confusion. "But that's what all soldiers do, isn't it? Fight for survival?" "No," Vextel said firmly. "We fight for victory, for honor, for our governments or our beliefs. Humans fight for something deeper. They fight against the very concept of giving up. When a Krillian warrior faces impossible odds, he fights bravely and dies with honor. When a human faces impossible odds, he finds a way to make the impossible possible." He stood up and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars. "In all my years of combat, I've seen species surrender when the situation became hopeless. I've seen warriors retreat when victory was impossible. I've seen entire civilizations accept defeat when faced with overwhelming force. But not humans? Zara asked, her form pulsing with nervous energy. Never humans, Vextal confirmed. I've seen them turn supply ships into weapons, use mining explosives to dig through unstable rock, and adapt their own biology to survive biological warfare. They don't just refuse to lose, they refuse to accept that losing is even possible. The plasma heater flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the night shift changing, boots echoing in, the corridor's voices calling out routine status reports. The scariest part, Vextal continued, is that they don't see any of this as unusual. To them, ramming a ship into an enemy vessel is just tactics. Risking everything to save strangers is just duty. Adapting to biological weapons is just survival. They act like the impossible is just another Tuesday. A soft sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the moment. The alien soldiers tensed, their conversation coming to an abrupt halt. Through the dim corridors of the outpost, they could hear someone walking with the light, confident step that could only belong to one species. A human soldier appeared at the edge of their circle, her silhouette backlit by the corridor lights. She was average height by human standards, with short dark hair and the kind of easy smile that suggested she'd never met a problem she couldn't solve. "Hey there," she said with a warm, friendly tone that somehow made the alien soldiers feel both welcomed and terrified. "Sorry to interrupt your late-night chat. I'm Commander Lee from the Human Tactical Unit." The alien soldiers exchanged terrified glances, suddenly remembering every word of Vextal's stories. The casual way she stood there, the friendly smile, the relaxed posture, it all seemed so normal, so harmless. But now they knew what lay beneath that human exterior. "Anyone interested in joining us for some combat training exercises?" Lee continued, seemingly oblivious to their fear. "Starting in 10 minutes. It's nothing too intense. Just some basic maneuvers and teamwork drills. Could always use more participants." None of the younger soldiers spoke. Crix's skin had turned completely white. Thorn looked like he was trying to blend into the wall, and Zara's ethereal form was barely visible. They all stared at this ordinary-looking human who was casually inviting them to what they now realized might be a life-or-death situation. The silence stretched uncomfortably, till Vextal slowly stood, his forearms moving in a gesture of respect. That was part military salute and part religious reverence. "I'll join you, Commander Lee." Lee's smile brightened. "Excellent. Always good to have experienced soldiers in the mix. What about the rest of you?" The younger soldiers remained frozen, unable to speak. Lee looked at them with what seemed like genuine concern. "Are you all okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. You're just tired," Vextal said quickly. "Long shift? You know how it is." Of course, Lee nodded understandingly. "Well, the invitation stands if you change your minds. We'll be in training Bay 7. As Lee turned to leave, she paused and looked back at the group. "By the way, great job on the patrol reports today. Command is really impressed with how well the different species are working together out here." With that, she walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into the general hum of the outpost. The alien soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the friendly, ordinary person they'd just met with the terrifying stories they'd heard. Vextal began walking toward the corridor, then stopped and turned back to his young companions. "You know what the most frightening thing about humans is?" Crix managed to whisper. "They don't even realize how terrifying they are," Vextal said. "To them, everything I just told you is completely normal. They think every species would do the same thing in their situation. They can't understand why we're so amazed by their refusal to give up." As he walked away to join Commander Lee, Vextal's final words echoed in the chamber. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't their technology or their tactics. It's their absolute refusal to accept extinction, no matter the cost. And the scariest part is, they think that's just what anyone would do. The three young soldiers sat in silence around the dying plasma heater, each lost in their own thoughts. They'd come to the outpost thinking they understood what it meant to be warriors, what it meant to fight for survival. Now they realized they'd been playing children's games compared to the humans, Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance. Indifferent to the fears and revelations of the small outpost on the edge of known space, but for three young alien soldiers, the universe had just become a much more dangerous and unpredictable place. And somewhere in Training Base 7, human commander was teaching combat techniques to a Krillian warrior, both of them completely unaware that they represented something that would forever change how the galaxy viewed the concept of survival itself.